is there just kind of a sense maybe in the locker room that like some of the success you've had over the last week could prove to be your big breakthrough or kind of maybe a turning point for you guys for the rest of the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all feeling good. I think the energy's high. Really good win in Minnesota. Had a chance to celebrate together. I think that only helps our chemistry. You know, all that stuff off the court definitely fuels us. We're having fun with each other. We're having fun together playing. So I think it is. I think this is a good moment for us. And, you know, especially we're playing without one of our best players. So to do that in those circumstances, we're really just proud of ourselves.
A'ja Wilson thought she could send a message, but the only thing she delivered was a full-on collapse of her own team's pride. What started as a blatant, over-the-back foul on Lexi Hull turned into one of the most humiliating nights the Las Vegas Aces have ever faced. It wasn't just about a missed call, it was about what happened next. Because while the referees swallowed their whistles and called it a jump ball, the Indiana Fever didn't complain. They got angry, and then they got surgical. The Aces were the self-proclaimed dynasty, unstoppable, untouchable. But all that noise came crashing down under the weight of a team that was tired of being disrespected on the scoreboard and in the headlines. Lexi Hull, the one who got leveled by Wilson, didn't flinch. She got up, locked in, and led by example as the Fever responded with a performance that felt personal. And here's the kicker. Caitlin Clark wasn't even on the floor. What followed wasn't just a win, it was a beatdown, a statement, a turning point that shook the WNBA to its core. So what exactly happened after Wilson made that foul? Let's break it down, step by step.
The Indiana Fever just beat the Aces. The first win for the Indiana Fever against the Las Vegas Aces since I was 22 years old.
It happened in the third quarter, but it felt like the opening scene of a war. Lexi Hull had just positioned herself perfectly under the basket, boxing out like she'd been taught since day one. It was clean, it was disciplined, it was textbook. She earned that rebound. But A'ja Wilson came crashing in from behind, climbing over Lexi's back like she was trying to reach the top shelf of a cabinet. Arms flailing, body pressing down, and yet no whistle. No foul, just a jump ball. Everyone watching, from die-hard fans to casual viewers, did a double take. The commentators hesitated, caught between calling the play for what it was or pretending the officials weren't rewriting the rulebook on live television. Even Stephanie White, normally composed, could be seen pacing the sideline in disbelief, mouthing words that needed no subtitles. That moment wasn't just a blown call. It was gasoline. Because when Lexi Hull hit the floor and didn't get the whistle she deserved, she didn't complain. She didn't gesture to the refs or make a scene. She got up. And that quiet, locked-in determination sent a shockwave through the Fever lineup. They weren't going to beg for fairness. They were going to take what was theirs. That single play lit a fire under Indiana. You could feel the energy shift instantly. Hull, who's known more for hustle than headlines, became the face of a team that had been fighting for respect all season. And this wasn't just any opponent. This was the Las Vegas Aces defending champs, media darlings, and the so-called dynasty that walked into the game expecting to win just by showing up. But now, they had poked the wrong team at the wrong time. The Fever had already been playing well, but that moment transformed them from competitive to cutthroat. Every possession after that hit was played with extra purpose. Screens were harder, rotations were sharper. Every loose ball became a war, and Indiana kept winning the skirmishes. The Aces may have drawn first blood, but the Fever came back with something deeper: conviction. And here's the twist. Even though the officials tried to downplay the foul with a neutral call, it only amplified the emotional response. Fans lit up social media, replaying the moment in slow motion, demanding answers. But Indiana didn't need the refs to set the tone. They took the call and used it as fuel. It was poetic in a way. One of the league's biggest stars tried to muscle her way into dominance, and instead, she woke up a team that had been simmering under the surface for weeks. That foul didn't just go uncalled. It went punished in the most humiliating way possible. Because from that moment forward, the Aces weren't just in a basketball game, they were in a firestorm of their own making. From the opening tip, the Indiana Fever didn't just show up, they kicked the door down. Before the Las Vegas Aces could even catch their breath, Indiana was already off to the races. A 6-0 run turned into 12-2, then 18-3. And by the time the first quarter ended, It was a jaw-dropping 21-4 beatdown. No Caitlin Clark? No problem. The Fever came into this game with something to prove, and they weren't waiting around to be handed anything. The Aces looked confused from the start. They weren't getting their usual rhythm, and the Fever were making them pay for every hesitation. It wasn't just a flurry of shots falling for Indiana, it was a strategic, surgical dissection of the defending champions. The Fever were aggressive, but smart, fast but controlled, loose but deadly focused. You could feel it with every cut, every screen, every extra pass. This wasn't luck. This was a team that finally understood how to make their talent click. It started with defensive pressure. The Fever suffocated the Aces, holding them to under 30% shooting in the first half. Paint points. Indiana owned that space, outscoring Vegas 16-4 in the lane. They moved like a unit, no wasted motion, no lazy switches, just full commitment to the plan. And that plan was clear. Take away everything the Aces do well and make them play desperate. Kelsey Mitchell was flying around like a woman possessed. Aaliyah Boston made the paint her personal kingdom. Natasha Howard bullied her way to the rim and dared anyone to stop her. It wasn't just the starters either. Everyone off the bench brought the same intensity. Every rotation felt like a new wave of pressure crashing down on Vegas, and the Aces had no life rafts. Even the body language told a story. While Indiana huddled tight between whistles, laughing, pointing, hyping each other up, the Aces stood isolated and stunned. Shoulders slumped, blank stares. You could practically hear the confusion echoing through the huddle. What's happening right now? The answer? A complete takeover. And remember, this was all happening without Caitlin Clark on the floor. The Fever were supposed to struggle without their rookie phenom. Instead, they looked more connected than ever. The ball moved freely. Players trusted each other. Every shot felt intentional. And when those shots dropped, you could feel the message reverberate through the building. This team is more than one star. By halftime, the scoreboard read 46-24. The Aces were getting crushed, not edged out, not caught in a close contest. Crushed, and yet, what made it even more devastating was that it didn't feel like a miracle performance from Indiana. It felt earned. This wasn't about one player going off or a team catching fire from deep. This was structure. This was discipline. This was the kind of basketball that doesn't just win games, it changes narratives. And Vegas, they weren't just losing, they were getting exposed. A'ja Wilson's stat line at the end of the game looked impressive: 29 points on 9 of -18 shooting, plus 11 made free throws out of 13. On paper, that's the kind of box score you expect from a superstar. But when you peel back the layers, those numbers start to feel hollow, because no amount of free throws could mask what really happened. The Aces were getting embarrassed, and Wilson's performance was like slapping glitter on a broken mirror. The referees were practically handing her the whistle all night. Every brush of contact seemed to result in a trip to the line. She was yanking players down from behind, going over backs, pushing through defenders with reckless abandon somehow. The fouls always favored her. It got so absurd, people started calling her Whistle Wilson, as if the referees were working overtime to keep her stat sheet clean. But even with all that help, it didn't matter, because while Wilson was padding her numbers, the rest of the Aces were completely falling apart. No one else on her team cracked double digits. In fact, outside of Wilson, the entire Las Vegas roster combined for just 25 points. That's not just bad, that's catastrophic, and the Fever knew it. Every time Wilson went to the line, Indiana didn't flinch. They didn't whine about the unfair calls. They tightened up. They responded with smarter possessions, harder defense, and relentless effort on both ends. It was like they decided, fine, let her have the free throws. Just make sure no one else eats. And that strategy worked to perfection. The more the whistles blew, the more disconnected Vegas became. Instead of rallying around Wilson, the team splintered. Players hesitated, unsure if they should attack or wait for another bailout call. Their offense stagnated, their spacing collapsed, and their confidence drained like air from a punctured tire. Wilson was scoring, but she was scoring in isolation, while her team drowned around her. Meanwhile, Indiana's response was pure team basketball: balanced scoring, constant movement, selfless play. It was the kind of approach that wins championships, not headlines. And the contrast was painful to watch. On one side, a team getting carried by the referees. On the other, a team that didn't need charity, they were earning every inch dot. The symbolism couldn't have been clearer. Wilson, with all her star power and whistles, stood alone while the so-called dynasty crumbled around her. Her 29 points were like fireworks at a funeral, loud, bright, but ultimately meaningless, because in the game of basketball, stat lines don't win games. Teams do, and the Indiana Fever. They weren't just playing as a team, they were playing like a movement. One that refused to be ignored, no matter how loud the referee's whistle blew. Most players would have folded after what happened to Lexi Hull, getting clobbered from behind by a superstar like A'ja Wilson in a nationally televised game. Then watching the officials call it a jump ball like it was a fair contest. That's the kind of moment that breaks your focus. It rattles your confidence. But not Lexi. Instead, Hull got up, brushed it off, and doubled down. Her response wasn't loud or flashy, it was cold, calculated, and relentless. She didn't yell, she didn't demand justice. She just played harder. Every possession after that foul became personal, and she made sure the aces felt it. On defense, Hull was everywhere, diving for loose balls, boxing out bigger players, staying glued to her assignment like she had something to prove. And she did. Not just to the officials who ignored the foul, not just to the fans watching from home, but to herself and to her team that she belonged, that she wouldn't back down, not from physicality, not from pressure, not from anyone. Made Lexi's impact even more powerful was that it wasn't driven by ego. She wasn't trying to steal the spotlight. She was doing the dirty work that doesn't always show up in box scores, fighting for rebounds, setting hard screens, tipping passes, and rotating on defense like her life depended on it. She became the emotional engine behind the Fever's unrelenting energy, and her teammates fed off it. When the call didn't go her way, it would have been easy to get frustrated, easy to check out or let the moment spiral. But Lexi Hull is cut from a different cloth. She absorbed that moment, turned it into fuel, and ignited her squad in the process. You could see it in the way Kelsey Mitchell started attacking downhill, in the way Aaliyah Boston owned the paint, in the way the entire Fever bench started leaning in closer, more locked in, more aggressive. Lexi's toughness set the tone. The Fever weren't going to be pushed around, not by the aces, and not by the referees. And the rest of the team followed her lead. It's poetic, really. On a night where star power was expected to dominate, it was a role player who swung the momentum. Lexi Hull didn't need a 30-point night to take control of the game. Her presence, her grit, her refusal to be broken, that was enough to flip the script. And as the aces unraveled under the weight of their own mistakes, Hull never lost her cool. She kept showing up, possession after possession, with the same intensity she started with. That foul from A'ja Wilson, it might have been the spark. But Lexi was the fire, and that fire spread fast. While the Indiana Fever were rallying around Lexi Hull and tearing through the aces with a vengeance, something strange was happening on the other side of the floor. Chelsea Gratha, veteran floor general, Olympic gold medalist, and supposed engine of the Las Vegas offense, was ... missing. Not literally, of course. She was out there on the court, but her impact, it was nowhere to be found. Gray ended the night with just 2 points. 2 on 1 of 3 shooting. She added 2 assists, but canceled those out with 5 ugly turnovers. For someone considered the brain of the Aces' offense, she looked more like a player stuck in a fog. Her passes were late, her decisions shaky, and her body language told. The whole story: frustration, confusion, and no answers. It wasn't just an off night, it was a vanishing act. And while Chelsea faded under pressure, someone else was making their presence felt without even stepping on the hardwood. Caitlin Clark, the injured rookie sensation, was on the bench, unable to play. But if you were watching the body language, if you paid attention to the energy radiating from the Fever sideline, you'd think she was still in the middle of the action. Every big play, Clark was on her feet. Every defensive stop, she was shouting, pointing, directing. She celebrated her teammates like it was Game 7 of the finals. That's leadership you can't teach. You could see the difference in bench dynamics with just one glance. On the Aces sideline, players looked defeated, slumped shoulders, quiet, murmurs. No fire, no voice, no one demanding more. It looked like a team going through the motions, not fighting to win. Meanwhile, Clark was orchestrating the emotional tempo of her team. She wasn't padding a stat sheet. She was doing something much harder, keeping belief alive in every player on that bench, and the team responded. The Fever played with unity, passion, and conviction. They celebrated each other's success. They fed off every hustle play, every stop, every swing of momentum. Chelsea Gray, on the other hand, was supposed to be the one settling her team down, the one orchestrating a comeback, the one delivering under pressure. Instead, she looked hesitant, passive, disconnected. And it wasn't just one bad quarter, it lasted all game. As the Fever's defense tightened and their confidence grew, Gray shrank. And when your point guard loses control, the rest of the team usually goes with her. In a game where the spotlight was on stars, Caitlin Clark managed to outshine her rivals without logging a single minute. That's presence. That's leadership. That's the difference between influence and invisibility. Because when it mattered most, Chelsea Gray disappeared and Caitlin Clark made sure everyone in that arena knew exactly who was still in charge of it from the sideline. You could see it building. The missed calls, the no calls, the absurd jump ball ruling after Lexi Hull got leveled every whistle seemed to tilt one way. Indiana Fever head coach Stephanie White kept her cool for as long as she could, but by the fourth quarter, she'd had enough. With just over 5 minutes left on the clock and the Fever firmly in control, the officials blew another questionable call. And that was it, Stephanie White snapped. Not in a theatrical, performative way. This was real, raw, honest fury. She stormed down the sideline, jawing at the refs with a fire you rarely see from her. This wasn't about showmanship. Her players were getting battered, overlooked, and flat out disrespected. And she wasn't going to sit on her hands while the Aces got every benefit of the doubt. The referee didn't hesitate. Technical foul. But instead of deflating the team, it did the opposite. The moment White exploded, the Fever erupted. You could see the players on the bench light up. Even Caitlin Clark, who had been cheering all game, jumped out of her seat with a grin. This was their coach, fighting for them, standing up for what was right, and they loved her for it. That tech didn't cost the Fever control. It gave them even more of it. In a league where officiating drama can sometimes swing the energy of a game, White's outburst was a turning point. It reminded everyone, fans, refs, and opponents alike. This team wasn't going to be pushed around anymore. Indiana was done playing polite. They were here to compete and to dominate. What happened next was pure intensity. The Fever didn't just maintain their lead, they smothered the Aces into silence. Las Vegas, already rattled and disjointed, completely unraveled. Their next few possessions were a mess of bad shots, lazy passes, and stalled offensive sets. Meanwhile, Indiana stayed aggressive, confident, ruthless. It was almost poetic. The coach gets ejected or teed up in some sports stories, and the team falls apart. But in this case, it was the opposite. Stephanie White's boiling point became the team's rallying cry. Her fire became their focus. The Fever dialed up the defense. Even more, started crashing the boards with renewed hunger. And executed every play with purpose. You don't often see coaches visibly impact the tempo and identity of a game in real time. But that's what White did. Her meltdown was a moment of pure human frustration, and it sparked an avalanche of momentum. Because in that single act, she reminded her team of something simple but powerful. We fight for each other. And that message rang louder than any whistle. The scoreboard, 81-54. The vibe, unapologetic domination, and Stephanie White. She didn't just coach a win, she ignited a movement. The Aces were already wobbling, but after that technical, they were done. By the time the fourth quarter rolled around, the game wasn't just slipping away from the Aces, it had become a full-blown public meltdown. The kind of unraveling you don't often see from championship teams. You expect pride, you expect pushback. But instead, the Las Vegas Aces delivered one of the most humiliating quarters in franchise history. They scored 7 points, 7 not in the first 5 minutes. Not during a dry stretch in the entire fourth quarter. And it wasn't just because shots weren't falling. It was the body language, the miscommunication, the complete collapse of team identity. Vegas looked like they didn't even want to be there. The team that came in flaunting their dynasty status had been stripped down to nothing but confusion and blank stares. Meanwhile, the Indiana Fever didn't let up not for a second. They smelled blood and went for the kill. Every possession was executed with intensity. Every defensive stand ended in frustration for Vegas. The Fever didn't just win, they made sure the Aces felt every second of that loss. It wasn't a fluke, it was a statement, and it wasn't just about the scoreboard. The Aces shot a horrifying 26% from the field for the game, the worst shooting performance against the Fever in 15 years. Outside of Aja Wilson, the rest of Vegas shot 16% combined. That's not just bad luck, that's lockdown defense. That's pressure. That's a team being picked apart piece by piece until nothing remains. Dana Evans went 1 for 10. Chelsea Gray, as mentioned before, scored only 2 points. The so-called deep roster of Las Vegas suddenly looked paper-thin. The Aces didn't have a single player step up to stop the bleeding. No momentum swings, no leader taking charge, just collapse. And as for Aja Wilson, her stat line looked glamorous, but her team was down by nearly 30 at the final buzzer. Her effort, though real, wasn't enough. She got her numbers, but it felt like scoring in an empty gym. The energy was gone. The impact was missing. It was 29 points wrapped in silence. The Fever bench, meanwhile, was electric. Caitlin Clark kept the energy alive even from the sideline, and players like Natasha Howard, Aaliyah Boston, and Kelsey Mitchell finished what they started. They didn't just win the game, they humiliated one of the most hyped franchises in the league, and they did it with joy, chemistry, and defense that felt like it came from a championship-caliber squad. The Aces' final possession said it all. Sloppy passing, a wild shot, no one fighting for the rebound. The buzzer sounded, and it wasn't just a defeat, it was a surrender. Final score, Indiana Fever 81, Las Vegas Aces 54. But numbers only tell part of the story. What we saw was the death of invincibility, the collapse of confidence, and the exposure of a team that thought their name alone was enough to win. The Fever made sure they paid for that arrogance. The Las Vegas Aces walked into this game wearing the crown, back-to-back champions, media darlings, a roster stacked with all-stars and gold medalists. They weren't just expected to win, they were expected to dominate. But when the final buzzer sounded and the scoreboard showed 81-54, it was clear the dynasty had cracked. And the Indiana Fever weren't just the ones holding the hammer. They were the ones building something new. What makes this victory so terrifying for the rest of the WNBA isn't just the margin or the embarrassment. It's the fact that the Fever did it without Caitlin Clark. The most hyped rookie in decades was sidelined, and Indiana still dismantled the defending champs with surgical precision. That's not luck. That's depth. That's chemistry. That's growth. This wasn't a one-night fluke where one player got hot. It was a complete performance from a team that finally looks ready to take itself seriously. Kelsey Mitchell dropped 25 points with ease, slicing through the Aces' defense like it wasn't even there. Aaliyah Boston owned the paint, adding 20 points and 7 rebounds. Natasha Howard brought pure force, racking up a double-double and walking away with Commissioner's Cup MVP honors. Every player had a role, and every player showed up. And then there was the defense. The Fever held the league's most explosive offense to 26% shooting. They forced 17 turnovers, shut down the paint, and made every Aces possession feel like a chore. It wasn't just tough defense, it was connected defense. Help rotations were perfect. Switches were crisp. They played like they shared a brain. That's championship-level defense, plain and simple. Contrast that with Las Vegas, a team built on pedigree and star power. When adversity hit, they didn't rise. They folded. Their bench was lifeless. Their chemistry vanished. Their confidence evaporated. The Aces didn't look like a team defending a title. They looked like a team caught in headlights, stunned, slow, and unsure of who to follow. Indiana, on the other hand, looked fearless. And now the entire league has to ask a scary question. If this is what the Fever look like without Caitlin Clark, what happens when she returns? The version of Clark that's ready to rain logo threes, run the fast break, and pull defenders out of position. Pair that with the grit of Lexi Hull, the power of Boston, and the newfound aggression from Howard, and suddenly you've got a team that doesn't just win games, they control them. This wasn't just a win, it was a warning. The era of the passive, overlooked Fever is over. They've arrived, and they're not interested in being anyone's underdog story anymore. They're building something real, something scary. And if the Aces are still clinging to their dynasty dreams, they might want to look over their shoulder. Because the Indiana Fever aren't coming. They're already here. The final score set at Oladi 1-54. But what happened on that court was so much more than numbers. It was the unraveling of a dynasty and the rise of a new, fearless contender. Aja Wilson's foul on Lexi Hull was meant to send a message. Instead, it lit a fire under the Indiana Fever that burned through everything in its path. They didn't just win without Caitlin Clark. They dismantled the defending champions in every phase of the game. While Vegas leaned on whistles and star names, Indiana leaned on each other. Lexi Hull turned a cheap shot into a spark. Stephanie. White turned frustration into fuel. And the entire roster played like they had something to prove on, nothing to lose. This was more than just a regular season game. It was a seismic shift in the WNBA's power structure. The Fever had been counted out for years, but now they've sent a message of their own. They're done waiting. And if this is what they can do without their superstar, just imagine the storm they're about to unleash when Caitlin Clark returns. To the floor, the league has been warned. The Indiana Fever are no longer chasing greatness. They're claiming it.